The sky was clear, stars were shining, the sea was dead calm on the starboard side, and I could see ice in the well deck. There's no sign of Iceberg then, because she'd passed us.
Over a century later, Titanic survivors' accounts are still sending chills down our spines. While most of us accept that an iceberg ended the voyage,
the Titanic has watertight compartments, and if anything does happen, these watertight compartments will keep the ship up until they get help.
Others, some who lived through it, have suggested something more sinister. Could it be true? Could the iceberg be a convenient cover for a far darker truth? In this video, we'll dive deep into the survivor accounts, conspiracy theories, and long-buried secrets behind the Titanic's tragic end. From whispered explosions to cursed artifacts and powerful enemies, this isn't the story you think you know. No crash, just chaos. A survivor's tears. More than 60 years after that frigid night in 1912, Titanic survivor Frank Prentice could barely hold back tears as he recounted what he experienced. He wasn't just any passenger. He was the assistant purser, someone trained to remain calm and organized under pressure. But nothing prepared him for the horror he would live through or the memories that would haunt him for the rest of his life. There was no impact as such, Prentice recalled in a 1979 BBC documentary. It was just like jamming your brakes on the car, and that was that. She stopped. For decades, the world believed the Titanic struck an iceberg with devastating force. But for those on board, like Prentice, the sensation was startlingly uneventful. No violent jolt, no screeching metal, no dramatic rupture. Just a sudden, eerie stop. Prentice was in his cabin when it happened. The porthole was open. He looked out. The sky was clear. Stars sparkled above a dead, calm sea. He saw nothing unusual. No panic, no visible damage. Yet the ship, the unsinkable marvel of engineering, had stopped cold in the middle of the Atlantic. Something was wrong, but no one knew what. Soon, orders were given. Prentice was told to go below deck and retrieve food supplies, biscuits for the lifeboats. By the time he returned, the Titanic was listing dangerously. The chaos was escalating. He could no longer reach the lifeboats, and that's when he heard it. 4 distinct reports, dull, echoing booms from deep within the ship. Not the kind of sound you'd expect from scraping ice. These were explosions. Mechanical failures, steam ruptures, or something far more intentional. Prentice, like many others, was thrown into the freezing water as the ship split in two. He hit the ocean with a terrific crack, saved only by a lifebelt, and, as he put it, the grace of God. Floating among bodies, watching the stern rise high before plunging beneath the sea, he felt certain he was going to die. But somehow he didn't. A lifeboat pulled him in. He survived, but not without scars. He later said, "You lie in bed at night and the whole thing comes round again." He wasn't alone in his confusion. Multiple survivors gave eerily similar testimonies to the U.S. Senate inquiry. They spoke of no major collision. Instead, they remembered subtle vibrations, quiet panic, and strange internal sounds. What kind of iceberg causes explosions within a ship? The official explanation pointed to the rupture of steam pipes or pressurized boilers, but no one could confirm it with certainty. This lack of external drama has fueled conspiracy theories for decades. If there was no unmistakable impact, what exactly caused the fatal damage? Was it faulty engineering, cheap rivets, or weak steel? A fire burning for days inside the hull that compromised the ship's strength? Or, as some whispered even then, a deliberate act, something designed to look like an accident, but executed with deadly precision? And what about the mysterious searchlight spotted from lifeboats? A light Prentice and others saw and hoped was rescue? If another vessel was close enough to be seen, why didn't it help? Was it a missed opportunity? Or was that ship not there to save, but to watch? Frank Prentice never claimed to have all the answers, but his memories offer something more than speculation. They offer doubt, a doubt that still lingers a century later in the cold Atlantic winds. But if the Iceberg wasn't the true destroyer, what was? One theory involves fire, deception, and a cover-up decades in the making. And it starts with a ship that wasn't supposed to be there. Explosions from below. Was it a torpedo? It's one of the most compelling and controversial theories in maritime history. What if the ship that sank in 1912 wasn't actually the Titanic? This theory, known as the Olympic switch theory, suggests that the Titanic's sister ship, the RMS Olympic, was disguised as the Titanic and deliberately sunk in a scheme to commit insurance fraud. It sounds like a wild conspiracy, the kind of thing whispered about in late-night forums and fringe documentaries. But to understand why it gained traction, we have to revisit the circumstances that led to the Titanic's fateful voyage. The RMS Olympic was launched a year before the Titanic and was nearly identical in design. But in September 1911, the Olympic was involved in a major accident with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The collision tore open the Olympic's hull and severely damaged her starboard side. Though she made it back to port, the repairs were extensive and costly. Worse, the White Star Line's insurers refused to pay, claiming the Olympic was at fault. This left the ship's owners with a financial disaster, and a motive, some believe, to pull off the greatest maritime swap in history. The theory claims that the Olympic, no longer financially viable and possibly still structurally unsound, was hastily patched up in Belfast and secretly renamed as the Titanic. Meanwhile, the real Titanic, which was still being completed, would later sail under the Olympic name. The goal? Sink the damaged ship, blame it on an accident, and collect the insurance money. Proponents of this theory point to several supposed pieces of evidence. The most famous involves the number of portholes on the ship. Original plans show the Titanic with 14 portholes on one side of the forward sea deck, while the Olympic had 16. When the Titanic set sail, photos showed it had 16, just like the Olympic. Coincidence? Some don't think so. They also cite differences in interior layouts, odd behavior from the crew, and a week-long final fitting period just before the Titanic's maiden voyage that could have been used to perform the switch. Even more suspicious to believers is that J.P. Morgan, the financier who owned the International Mercantile Marine Company, which controlled White Star Line, had booked a luxurious private suite on the Titanic's maiden voyage. He canceled at the last minute, claiming poor health, but was later spotted relaxing in a French resort. Why would the mastermind behind the ship's construction back out unless he knew something was about to go horribly wrong? Critics of the theory, however, are quick to debunk it. Maritime historians like Gareth Russell and Kent Leighton argue that the logistics of pulling off a full-scale ship swap in less than 2 weeks are implausible. The two ships, while nearly identical, had different floor plans, different mechanical systems, and different serial numbers engraved throughout their structures. Swapping them would have required an enormous amount of labor, secrecy, and the cooperation of hundreds of workers and officers, all without a single credible whistleblower coming forward over the next century. Even more damaging to the theory is the insurance math. The Titanic was insured for less than its construction cost. If the goal was profit, the swap made no financial sense. And when the wreck was discovered in 1985, the identifying markers confirmed it was indeed the Titanic that lay on the ocean floor. Still, for many, the idea of a switched ship is just too enticing to dismiss. It plays to our fascination with cover-ups, corruption, and unsolved mysteries. And if someone was willing to sink a ship for money, what else might they have done to ensure its failure? Could there have been another hidden danger already smoldering deep within the Titanic before it ever met ice or sabotage? A silent threat from the heart of the ship that no one saw coming until it was too late. The Titanic was switched. One of the most enduring and controversial conspiracy theories about the Titanic suggests that the ship that actually sank was not the Titanic at all. According to this theory, the vessel that went down in the North Atlantic was the Olympic, the Titanic's nearly identical sister ship, switched in a calculated scheme to recover insurance money from a failing asset. It's a claim that's been whispered for decades, circulating in books, forums, and sensational documentaries, feeding the belief that what appeared to be a maritime accident was actually a carefully orchestrated insurance fraud. The theory hinges on an event that occurred in 1911, nearly a year before the Titanic's maiden voyage. During a trip from Southampton to New York, the Olympic collided with the Royal Navy cruiser HMS Hawke. The impact left the Olympic with significant structural damage to her hull and keel. While she was repaired, some claim that her condition was worse than White Star Line, owned by the International Mercantile Marine Company, was willing to admit. Allegedly, the repairs were a patchwork fix, and the ship was no longer seaworthy in the long term. Facing a major financial loss and pressure from investors, the company was said to have concocted a desperate plan. The theory posits that the damaged Olympic was disguised as her brand-new sister ship, the Titanic, while the actual Titanic, still in pristine condition, was quietly renamed Olympic. By sailing the compromised vessel under the Titanic's name and arranging for it to accidentally sink, White Star Line could collect on the insurance and cut their losses, especially since the Titanic was insured for a much higher value. The ultimate goal? Sacrifice a doomed ship, bury the evidence in the ocean, and quietly move forward with their business intact. Supporters of this theory often point to subtle but telling differences between the two ships. For example, they argue that certain interior details, like window arrangements and deck layout differences captured in photographs, do not match Titanic's original design plans. They also highlight the confusing paperwork surrounding repairs, overlapping shipyard records, and some testimonies from crew members who supposedly noticed inconsistencies. One story even claims that some of the Titanic's crew were suspicious of the voyage from the start. Some canceled at the last minute, while others allegedly brought religious texts with them, as if anticipating disaster. But not everyone is convinced. Maritime historians like Gareth Russell and Kent Leighton have pushed back hard on this theory, calling it logistically implausible. They argue that switching two nearly identical, but not identical, ships would have been nearly impossible to carry out in secrecy. The ships had different configurations in their promenade decks, interior trims, and engine room layouts. To swap one for the other would require thousands of people to stay silent, from engineers and builders to inspectors and crew. And crucially, they note that the insurance payout for Titanic's sinking wouldn't even have covered the cost of replacing the Olympic, making the alleged financial motive weak at best. Still, the theory refuses to die. Like many conspiracies, it survives because of a perfect cocktail: real historical events, unanswered questions, and human fascination with cover-ups. Even the most well-documented disaster can become fertile ground for speculation when there are gaps to fill and motives to imagine. In the end, whether the theory is true or not almost doesn't matter. Its persistence speaks to the public's suspicion of powerful companies and the belief that behind every tragedy lies a hidden agenda. But even if it wasn't cold-blooded corporate fraud that doomed the ship, some believe it wasn't merely human hands that set the course for disaster. Could something far older and far darker have joined the voyage? Something that brought with it a curse sealed in history? The curse of the mummy. Among the many passengers aboard the Titanic was a man whose name still sparks debate among historians of the paranormal, William Stead, a respected British journalist and editor with a deep fascination for the supernatural. While many boarded the ship in search of luxury, opportunity, or a new life, Stead brought with him a chilling story, a tale of an ancient Egyptian mummy said to carry a deadly curse. As the Titanic glided through the icy Atlantic, Stead would regale fellow first-class passengers with tales of this supposed relic of doom. It wasn't just idle chatter. He truly believed it was aboard the ship, and that belief would take on horrifying new meaning just days later. According to Stead, the artifact in question was the coffin lid of a high priestess, excavated from Egypt, and rumored to bring death and disaster to anyone who handled it. In the years before the Titanic's voyage, a series of unexplained mishaps had occurred at the British Museum, where the mummy's lid supposedly rested. Guards reportedly quit their jobs. Curators fell ill. One journalist, after handling the lid, was said to have died in mysterious circumstances. Even Stead himself linked the artifact to a string of bizarre events in London, from sudden fires to strange accidents. He believed the relic's presence had caused chaos in the city, and that, somehow, it had found its way onto the Titanic. Stead told passengers that the mummy had been sold to a wealthy American who arranged for its transport to New York aboard the unsinkable ship. He claimed that the cursed object had already left a trail of misfortune in its wake, and that its voyage across the sea would be no exception. At the time, his fellow travelers treated the tale as thrilling after-dinner entertainment. No one could have imagined how differently they would feel just a few days later, as they scrambled for lifeboats beneath a black sky and braced against the freezing Atlantic air. After the Titanic sank, the media seized on Stead's eerie tale. One survivor recounted Stead's story to a New York reporter, and soon headlines were filled with talk of a mummy's curse. The public, reeling from the unimaginable tragedy, grasped at any explanation, no matter how improbable. The idea of ancient revenge, of a wrathful spirit exacting punishment for disturbing sacred tombs, fit the moment's horror perfectly. Some claimed the mummy had been smuggled aboard in the cargo hold, that it had somehow evaded documentation. Others insisted it had been hidden among priceless artifacts in first class. As with many urban legends, the lack of evidence only added to the allure. But the truth? It's far less dramatic, yet no less telling of how humanity seeks meaning in chaos. The supposed mummy never left the British Museum. It was never placed on the Titanic. Museum records confirm that the artifact remained in London throughout 1912. There was no cursed cargo, no sarcophagus of doom nestled in the ship's hold. Even the coffin lid itself was misidentified. It wasn't an actual mummy, but rather a funerary board that had become tangled in spooky rumors thanks to decades of imperial folklore and myth-making. So why did so many believe the story? Perhaps because the real explanation, the collision with an iceberg, the failure of safety protocols, the hubris of calling a ship unsinkable, was too ordinary to explain such profound loss. The mummy's curse offered something else: cosmic justice. It suggested that the disaster wasn't random, but retribution. That the Titanic, symbol of opulence and empire, had been punished for disturbing the sacred. But as chilling as that story is, a far more tangible and powerful force was at play behind the scenes. One that didn't rely on ancient curses, but modern ambition. The next man we'll meet didn't carry a relic, he carried influence. And some believe he wielded it to reshape the entire world. J.P. Morgan and the Fed conspiracy. When the Titanic sank in 1912, it marked more than just a maritime tragedy. For some, it became the centerpiece of a dark and powerful theory, one that suggested the ship's destruction wasn't an accident at all. Instead, It was an intentional, calculated move designed to clear the path for one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world, the United States Federal Reserve. And at the heart of it all stood one man, J.P. Morgan, John Pierpont. Morgan was no ordinary businessman. By the early 20th century, he had become a towering figure in American finance, wielding influence across steel, railroads, electricity, and shipping. His firm grip on the nation's economic arteries earned him the nickname the Napoleon of Wall Street. He also had controlling interest in the White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic. As its most prestigious ship prepared for its maiden voyage, Morgan had reportedly booked a luxurious suite for himself, complete with a private promenade and custom cigar holders. He had even attended the Titanic's launch in 1911, publicly celebrating the ship as a symbol of modern innovation and luxury. Agonizingly, however, J.P. Morgan suddenly canceled at the last moment, the very last moment. A last-minute thought about taking a few good days off for a spa retreat at an unnamed resort in France. A trip that allegedly included long massages and sulfur baths. To many, it must have seemed odd, considering the significance of the Titanic's appearance and Morgan's own stake in the voyage. Indications for conspiracy theorists, however, began to burgeon. Morgan was not the only big man associated with the Titanic. With three of Morgan's chief opponents against the creation of a centralized American banking system, John Jacob Astor IV, who had been a very rich man in the world, Benjamin Guggenheim, an industrial magnate, and Isidor Straus, the co-owner of Macy's department store, and a former member of Congress, everyone around that ship went down. All three were known to oppose centralized banking power. Some historians and conspiracy theorists say they would have had the means and clout to postpone or derail the formation of the Federal Reserve. In December 1913, just over a year after the Titanic disaster, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, effectively granting Morgan and other financial elites the kind of centralized control they had long desired. For believers in the conspiracy, the timing was too convenient. They argue that the Titanic became a carefully orchestrated tool of economic assassination, with Morgan pulling the strings from behind the curtain. Eliminate the opposition, bury the evidence beneath the Atlantic, and reshape the financial world in your image. Critics, of course, are quick to point out the theory's flaws. There's no definitive proof that any of the three men aboard had the power to stop the Federal Reserve, nor is there evidence linking Morgan directly to a plot. His change of plans could just as easily have been a personal choice, or the result of last-minute obligations. And the idea that one of history's most catastrophic maritime disasters was deliberately staged is, to many, a stretch too far. Still, the suspicion endures. It doesn't help that Morgan's empire was built on bold, ruthless decisions. He was a man who saw the long game, who wasn't afraid to move pieces, people included, to secure control. And in the context of a new global economy, where fortunes were being made and broken overnight, anything seemed possible. The idea that J.P. Morgan might have orchestrated the Titanic's demise to cement his legacy and remove powerful opposition isn't backed by hard evidence. But it's a narrative that refuses to fade, a whisper that grows louder with every uncovered detail, every convenient coincidence. And if Morgan didn't need an iceberg to take down his enemies, what if there was never one to begin with? One naval expert believed the fatal force that doomed the Titanic wasn't frozen at all. It was hiding in plain sight. Pack ice, not iceberg. For over a century, the story has stayed the same. The Titanic struck an iceberg and went down. But one veteran ice expert, Captain L.M. Collins, challenged that narrative head-on, and his theory could rewrite how we understand the disaster entirely. According to Collins, the Titanic didn't collide with a towering iceberg at all. Instead, he believed the ship scraped along a field of pack ice, a vast, flat, and nearly invisible expanse of hardened Arctic ice. Unlike the dramatic image of a jagged white peak looming in the dark, this ice was stealthy and low, perfectly camouflaged by the calm sea and cold air. Captain Collins wasn't just a theorist. He had decades of first-hand experience navigating icy waters and was part of a specialist British service that studied sea ice and its effects on ships. Drawing on that expertise, Collins began to scrutinize survivor reports from the Titanic's final hours. He noticed a striking inconsistency. Eyewitnesses gave conflicting descriptions of the iceberg. Some said it was tall, as high as 60 feet. Others, including Fourth Officer Joseph Boxhall, claimed it was barely above the water. How could so many trained sailors and crew members see such drastically different things? Collins believed the answer lay in a phenomenon called super-refraction, a trick of light that distorts perception in extreme cold. In these conditions, a sheet of ice on the water's surface could appear to float higher or shimmer strangely, making it almost impossible to judge its size and distance accurately. As a result, what looked like a monstrous iceberg to one person may have been nothing more than a low-lying ice field. This theory aligns with accounts from crew in the Crow's Nest, who described a white haze stretching across the horizon. What Collins argued was not fog, but a curtain of flat pack ice spread out like a minefield across the Titanic's path. But perhaps Collins's boldest challenge to the iceberg theory was his use of physics, specifically the Berge effect. This concept suggests that if the Titanic had truly struck a massive, immovable iceberg head-on at full speed, the water displacement would have created a kind of upward suction. That suction would likely have forced the iceberg to roll, pivot, or break apart. It would not have scraped gently along the hull, and more importantly, such a collision would have torn the Titanic open instantly, causing it to sink in minutes, not over the course of nearly 3 hours. That prolonged timeline, almost 160 minutes from impact to complete submersion, suggests something more complex. A long, uneven tear along the hull, potentially caused by repeated contact with low, sharp-edged ice rather than a single catastrophic blow. Collins believed that the Titanic's hull was breached in several places by pack ice slicing it open gradually, like a knife through soft metal. This would explain why so many survivors reported hearing a grinding noise instead of a loud crash, and why some, like Frank Prentice, heard what sounded like multiple explosions or structural failures deep within the ship. This theory, though controversial, adds weight to other clues from the wreck site. Modern dives and sonar imaging reveal a pattern of damage that appears scattered, not centralized. Small, localized punctures can be seen near the front of the ship, consistent with a slow scraping contact rather than one clean break. And if that's true, then the iceberg itself, often painted as the villain of this story, might have only played a minor role in the tragedy. Still, the pack ice hypothesis leaves room for another haunting question. Could something else have made the ship more vulnerable that night? Something already weakening the hull before it ever touched ice? Whether it was hidden ice or human error, there may have been another factor weakening the Titanic, one burning quietly in its heart. The fire beneath the decks, beneath the glittering chandeliers and polished promenades of the Titanic, a hidden danger may have been smoldering long before the ship ever saw an iceberg. Deep in the belly of the vessel, inside one of its massive coal bunkers, a fire had already taken hold. According to multiple accounts, this fire had been burning for several days, even before the Titanic set sail from Southampton. Crew members knew about it. Firemen tried to manage it. But the question remains, how much damage had it already done by the time the ship faced the ice? Coal bunker fires were not uncommon on steamships of that era. The coal used to power the engines was prone to spontaneous combustion, especially under pressure. But this wasn't just any fire. Reports suggest the blaze may have burned against the Titanic's hull, specifically on the starboard side, the same side that would later scrape against the iceberg. Some engineers have suggested that the fire reached temperatures so extreme it could have compromised the steel in that section of the hull, weakening it just enough to turn a glancing blow into a fatal wound. To combat the blaze, firemen shoveled the burning coal directly into the furnaces, both to remove it and to keep the flames from spreading. Ironically, this frantic effort to contain one danger may have accelerated another. Pushing more coal into the furnaces increased the ship's speed, possibly explaining why Titanic was moving so fast despite receiving multiple warnings about nearby ice fields. If the fire influenced the decision to maintain or increase speed, it may have indirectly contributed to the disaster. And if the hull was indeed structurally weakened, then even a minor impact could have led to catastrophic flooding. There's photographic evidence to back some of these claims. One image taken before departure shows a dark vertical streak on the Titanic's hull, roughly where the fire was said to have burned. Some experts believe this marks the location of heat damage. Others, like Titanic historian Samuel Halpern, remain skeptical. Halpern has publicly dismissed the idea that the fire significantly compromised the ship's structure, arguing that the watertight compartments were still intact and the ship's design could handle localized heat. According to him, the iceberg, not the fire, remains the clear cause of the sinking. Yet doubts persist. The timeline fits, the location aligns, and the behavior of the ship on that cold April night, the speed, the odd noises, the unusual failure of the supposedly unsinkable hull, continues to raise eyebrows. Could the Titanic have been doomed not just by the forces of nature, but by a threat it carried within? Could the fire have been the silent slayer that set the stage for the perfect disaster? And then there's the metaphor no one can ignore. The physical fire may have burned in the engine room, but another kind of fire burned higher up, in the minds of those in charge. A fire fueled by pride, by ambition, by the desire to prove that man's engineering had finally conquered nature. There was a need to go fast, to arrive in record time, to show off the might of modern luxury and innovation. That fire, too, went unchecked, and in the end, it may have proven just as deadly. The iceberg gets the blame. But what if it merely finished what the fire had already begun? The Titanic's legacy is more than steel and rivets. It's emotion, mystery, and memory. Was it really an iceberg that sealed its fate? Or was it sabotage, fire, mistaken identity, or something worse? Let us know what you believe in the comments. If this deep dive left you questioning everything, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the next video on screen for more mysteries hiding in plain sight.